I had an idea based on some other guitar pieces I had made where I would try and work with melody, but I didn't want to do that with my own playing on electric guitar. The orchestration or the choice of instruments was based around just loving the flute. There's several flutes on this, and also about the personal connection with the musicians themselves. One of the musicians named Stephen Moore, he's a trombone player, and we've made a lot of music together and had a lot of adventures together too. And he's just an incredible mind and musician. And he's based in Seattle, so I went to Seattle with the idea to work on these arrangements with him and some other musicians there. The other player, Hans Tuber, who is a multi-instrumentalist, and he plays flute, bass flute, clarinet, trumpet on this. So it gave a lot of options with only two people. But I would say also the instrumentation is based on just a concept of how am I going to compose for the GRM Commission. And from the beginning, my idea was to work within the kind of more traditional acousmatic tape or concrete, formats with arrangements. So I wanted to record everything and then make the composition following, and not use effects and sort of use it as an editing arrangement. And in order to have my electric guitar sound be playable in the concert halls of the radio, I wanted to get really perfect recordings of the instruments and work that way, where everything's right there, but I can work with all of the channels to create sound pressure, physicality, and etc. But specifically with the wind instruments, I wanted to work in a melodic way that was echoing some of the progressions that had informed me with coming from Hindustani music. And they are not Hindustani musicians, but like me, they have both Hans and Steve Moore, Hans Tuber and Steve Moore, we have an affinity and like a sensitivity, sensib, from the form. Well, there was a kind of transcription that happened between a guitar progression that I developed through many pieces as a live piece, and a transcription of that into notation. But I have very limited skill at notation in a traditional way. And of course, the purpose of notation is to communicate the idea to the musician as clearly as possible, and for posterity. But in order to maximize the efficiency of the recording session with the winds, I needed help to make that transcription and to be able to make modifications to it and to refine it very quickly. And our good friend Callie Malone was also there with me, and she took charge of doing that transcription from my notes that I'd written and some conversation about meter and pitch, and also a little advice from her side, her sensib. But that was really crucial to make that recording session efficient, because I didn't want to just have, like in a pure concrete manner, like, okay, play this note, play this note, play this note, and then I combine. I wanted to also do it like, or as a performance-based, so it had emotive quality of the player, not just timbre, not the pure sound thing, but have it be human. So that was very important. And Callie Malone also did the conduction of the takes of the tracking. In order to work on those conceptual methods and intentions in the context of this commission from GRM, I found that let's make as perfect capture of that sound as possible, and then do the arrangement as a tape piece, work within the acousmonium for the playback. And Randall Dunn is someone I've worked with since 2005. After explaining this to him, he insisted that we travel to Woodstock, New York, to a studio called Applehead, which was built in a farm, an old farm, and in one of the garage, there was a live room. I brought some of my Sun Model T amplifiers, including the first one I'd ever acquired in 1998, and also a Hiwatt, some Sound City reissue stuff. I basically had my gear there, which is something essential to this. But we did a lot of things with miking, anticipating the composition process on tape in the studio with a lot of room mics and close mics, of course, in order to create space with pure recording and not to simulate space with effects in the composition. So actually I followed through with all of that. Because the quality of these recordings of the guitar, I was able to compose the entire piece with no effects except EQ and of course editing. But that was all pretty strategic and like working in this place with Randall, with my gear. But also mentally, we had a visit from a Tibetan Buddhist Rinpoche actually before the session who blessed the recording room and the amplifiers. All of these things folded together. So when I actually came to GRM, I had all of these materials like tape, and then I started the composition process. The guitar parts there's 5 voices, and those were more linear voices from performances, and that was the foundation right away. 4 of those voices are feedback guitar performances, essentially, and that sort of it's amazing what happens with feedback. I think, in my experience, there's so much personality in feedback, guitar feedback. And spatial personality, that kind of set the tone for the rest of the composition. There's also one lead guitar, which is introducing the melody in a fashion that's sort of, well, you can call it a melody. I mean, technically it is a melody, but it's also a distortion melody. Once this was in place, there were several elaborations with the wind recordings that happened, where my idea was that those voices, when they entered in very specific chord pads as well, not just melodic. We did a lot of takes of elaborated chord structures, and my idea was those chord structures, when they come in, they push through the feedback layers like a envelope and kind of flex the feedback layers. Not burst, not take over, but there's a kind of tension that moves back and forth with those chord structures and the feedback, because the feedback becomes a fundamental tone, which those chord structures are related to. And those kind of flexibilities with tension also happen with the amplitude of sound and the relationship between the actual spatialization of the speaker playback. But then there's some very actual melodic progressions that happen as well, mainly centered around the flute. I would say that the bass flute performance is the center of the piece, actually, even though the guitars and the lead guitar take up so much sonic space with harmonics, with the distortion harmonics. The real main character and personality is the bass flute performance in the piece, playing the melody, which has its space as well. I think I came into this project at GRM fortunate to have experience working with spatialization in scores I had made with the late Peter Rehberg for Spectacle Vivant Creations, directed by Giselle Vienne. And that was a long collaboration. And starting in 2008, we started working on an idea that was first inspired by the lighting designer, the late Patrick Rioux, who was a master light designer. After Peter Rehberg passed away, we had these shows scheduled, like a sort of revisitation of this piece, and This Is How You Will Disappear. And it was like, well, what are we going to do now? Peter's music we can't perform it. But I was able to take charge and work with GRM to take all of his materials and turn it into a tape piece, basically. So in the future, anyone could play this. Well, anyone who knows the technology, like an engineer could play it, as long as the speaker setup was followed, like a tape piece, like a GRM classical tape piece. And that was some of the best advice I received from Francois Bonnet, actually. He advised me, you should do that because, one, these patches, they work fine now, but also like the posterity of the work. So I did some of that work at the GRM Studios last year or 2 years ago, and we did the performances. It worked very well and everything. So when I came in to work on this piece now, I had that in mind, like the way everything was set up in the Studio A with the Genelec ring and the large speakers as a front of house. That kind of guided the spatialization. And also the concept of, let's make a tape piece. So this piece is actually just tracks. It could be played in any software, or we could even print a tape and it could be played off a tape. It's not something that I'm manipulating live, except for faders, just amplitude adjustments, VCAs. And that's something different, you know. It's very much a live performance because it has the performer. But with the spatialization, it's designed that this is the speaker setup. This sound is going to this speaker. This sound's going to this speaker. There's a compound effect from different voicings, but it's supposed to be, it's composed. It's composed spatialization.